Okay, so I'm going to keep going and we will come back to those issues. I'm not going to sidestep them. So we're currently sitting here on unceded lands of the Lekwungen people. The land was stolen from them through the introduction of smallpox, which was an act of genocide, and that genocide continues to this very day as we continue to use materials extracted from their lands and we continue to live on these lands.
Sorry, can you speak up a bit?
Sure. So considering our position here, I think that it's important that we talk about genocide and we don't ignore it. Nor do we ignore that our presence here as settlers may well reaffirm the colonial relationship. If we are to be serious about our anarchist values of anti-oppression, we must address this head on. So John Zerzan, Noam Chomsky, who you just recently brought up, as well as some other peoples amongst the left, have accused you of advocating genocide. The claim is that the way in which you suggest people should be living would require the global population to be drastically reduced. I would like you to give this opportunity to respond to those allegations.
Well, Chomsky and others know that we're not talking about some overnight deal. I mean, there's nobody, I mean, there might be somebody who doesn't care if lots of people starve, but I mean, the reason I mentioned, for example, the people in the tower blocks, these big, and you don't have to go to India to see it, obviously. I mean, I think we're frankly more worried about it than these people who just say, we got to have more energy, we got to feed the beast, we got to keep the machine going at all costs. But energy for what? Yeah, to drive this whole damn suicide machine. I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. I don't know where the genocide term really fits, but to start thinking about this, try to really confront it for the first time. It seems like the left never has. But tell me where it ever has. That's just a history of failure, and they don't even want to go there. I mean, I just don't. There's no easy answer. We don't have a bunch of answers. That's for damn sure. But at least the reality is there pretty glaringly. And you want to talk about genocide? Well. If we just keep on going, that's what guarantees it. But somehow we got to turn it around.
Okay. So Matt Hern, a similar accusation could be made against urbanism. Does not the structure of a city require the constant importation of resources from external areas to upkeep the buildings, the infrastructure, to maintain such a dense population? And if so, would this not mean that we as a culture would need to continue all industrial processes that are so destructive to what's left of nature in order to maintain cities? And what are the people who still live on the land? Would this not continue to displace these peoples if the resources needed to maintain the city happen to be on the lands that they live on?
No. Yeah. I'm trying to remember the rest of your question there, sorry. So a couple of things I would say. There's something and there's a whole bunch. A vast amount of nuance that I'm sure is getting lost in your stuff there, John, in short order, and I think I'm missing here too. So bear with us on it. I would say that the answer is no. Sure that the way that cities are constructed right now, yeah. But capitalism perverts everything, right? It's perverted music, it's perverted art, it's tracked the way we think about everything, and not only the way we think about cities. And so when I talk about cities in terms of densification and living compactly and sharing, I want you not to think about huge towers. Because you mentioned, for example, Istanbul, right, which is one of my very favorite places in the world. They are way denser than you probably ever want, and not a single tower, in the whole core of the city. People are capable of living densely, vastly more densely than you need. What really eats up energy, what really eats up space, what really eats up indigenous land is sprawl. Is massive, endless use of resources, the profligate use of land, the profligate use of energy. So, for example, this is a story, forgive me again for those of you that saw me when I was here last summer, is that this guy called David Owen, who wrote a good book, he told a story about he left college with his wife, and they moved into an ecological community, and the ecological community was they had a very small living space. They hardly purchased anything. because they had so little room. The community was quite compact, so they could walk or take public transit everywhere. And they hardly used any heat because they're living in a building with a bunch of other people. And their energy footprint was just a sliver of what the average American is. And that ecological community was Manhattan. And I'm not calling for the world to look like Manhattan, except to say that Manhattan, if it were a state, would rank 51st in per capita energy consumption. To say that Manhattanites are able to walk, are able to use public transit, are able to share resources, to share land in a way unthinkable in a suburb, for example. And so I think I'm answering some of the earlier question that you posed to John. But I would say that and I have to say that there's, I started trying to, my readings of Primitivism, and John are a bit old. I haven't read y'all for a good decade or so, frankly speaking. So I got into primitivism.com this morning and I started reading. And then I bailed on it, so I figured I'd just listen to you instead. And I would say that the part that spoke to me most then is that profound humility, especially coming from a couple of settler guys, in terms of our analysis, and the capacity to listen, and the capacity to think, and the capacity for our capacity to take the lead from Indigenous folks, I think is paramount. I think that's our first order of business here, to think. And before we ever got here, I want to say this area, but I'm not sure about this area, but it's certainly the area where I live in the Lower Mainland was an absolutely teeming metropolis of people. There were people coming, there were at least 3 different sets of folks that used literally the spot where my house is over and over and over again. The people were coming and going. It was densely populated. It was incredibly, it was full of trade. It was full of activity for millennia. And so I think even beginning to take that lead is our first order of business. That there were people that lived, and I don't know where current research is about how many people lived in North America prior to contact, but lots. And people were able to live here for millennia without fucking shit up. And we've been able to show up here and trash it in very short order. So at the very least we could do as anarchists. I can't remember. You call yourself an anarchist too? You said no. I'm not in favor of labels particularly, but I'm happy to be called an anarchist if I got it. The very first thing in our first, second, and third order of business would be, I'd say, to take our lead and our inspiration from Indigenous folks and Indigenous knowledge. So I think I'm answering your question, but let that be there.
Well, the next question for John. Buckminster Fuller suggested that we have more than enough of everything already, and that the real issue is just distribution. That there's 4 pounds of food produced per day per person, enough to make everyone in the world fat, but it's being dumped in the ocean to keep prices up and stuff like that. So what do you think? Is it just an issue of distribution?
Well, as soon as you move to the distribution part, then you introduce the state, I guess, pretty closely, because who is it that does this distribution? That's kind of at the beginning of things. You could look at it that way, anyway. I mean, yeah, there's massive consumption. It's a consumerist effort to fill up what's missing. People. It wasn't so long ago when you didn't see all these storage spaces, and I've seen them up here. I haven't been here very much around, but people got so much stuff they got to rent places to put all their shit. And, you just keep buying things. Obviously, the capitalist thing. That's the ethos, because you don't have much else. So, but you kind of referred in passing to community, that in the denser situation you can have community, but I think we know there isn't any now, and how would we conjure that up? That would be nice, but there's a reason it disappeared. And I was thinking today of Durkheim, the so-called father of sociology. I don't know who the mother of sociology is, but he wrote about madness and about suicide, and what it has to do with modern industrial cities in the, I guess, more or less the middle of the 19th century, middle second half. And he found, not surprisingly, that incidents of madness and incidents of suicide go way up. when you got people, in these new urban places. Not a pretty thing. And, you can have people very close together, but they don't know each other. That's the tragic thing of it. You don't know your neighbor, that sort of cliche. It's all the more true. People are more and more isolated all the time. And I'm just, maybe you have an answer there for how that could be turned into, and I have a good experience. I mean, I live in a small city, and Eugene is, I think, just about the size of Victoria, I think. And I was in this housing co-op for 15 years, and it was a self-managed deal, and we made all the decisions and did the work, and we're accountable to each other, and that was great. I really learned a lot. I wasn't expecting to, actually. I got in there mainly for the cheap rent, but I quickly saw that something was really cool here. And anyway, so I'm not dumping on ideas for to come together, but in the big urban situation though, I mean, we tore up a big parking lot, well, not real big, but big in our co-op, and put in a garden. It's a cool thing to do. It was great. But if you want densification, I guess you wouldn't be tearing up. Well, you'd have fewer parking lots if people didn't need to be in their cars, I guess. So anyway, going too long.
Yeah.